Kesubos Daf Tes Vav begins with the Mishnah, and it is the final daf in the first parak of the Masechta. We have three primary sugyas, all related as part of one flow. The first is that the Mishnah brings an additional third Tana. The Gemara wants to know which of the previous two Tanaim is he going like in the sugya, which seems to be similar. This will take us to the discussion of Kavua. Kol kavua kamechza mechza dami. The Gemara will give sources and explain that concept, and then we'll get into what is the halacha when you have someone who was found in the street that we don't know his ancestry, we don't know if he's Yisrael or if he's Akum. How do we paskin? All based on how many people of which type are in the city, and in which halachas do we say that? So let's begin. We start with the Mishnah. The Mishnah quotes Rabbi Yosi, who's quoting Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. And he says that there was an incident that happened where there was a girl who went down to draw water from the spring, and she was raped over there. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said, the question we have to figure out, is she now mutter to marry a Kohen or not? If the person she was nival to is someone who passes her to Kahuna, like a mamzer or an asin or an akum, so now she's usher to marry Kohanim. On the other hand, if the person that she was nival to does not pass her to Kahuna, then she's mutter to marry Kohanim. We don't know who it was. So Yochanan ben Nuri's psak was that you go basar roy. If you look at the majority of the people in the city, and if the majority of the people are ones who do not pass her to Kahuna, she's mutter. If not, she's usher. That's the Mishnah. The Gemara says we have to put this in the context of the machlokes between Rav and Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua that we've been discussing up till now. That was a machlokes if a woman was nival, either because we find out that she's pregnant or she was found to not be a psula, whatever the story is, she was nival, and we don't know to whom. There, Rabbi Gamliel had said, you follow chazaka. She has a cheskas kashrus. She's also saying for sure that she was nival to a kashrus, so she's the bari. So she, with the cheskas kashrus, with the bari, we believe her, and it doesn't matter what the majority of the city is, even if the city is 99% psulim. If she says she was nival to the kashrus, she's believed to the cheskas kashrus. Rabbi Shua, on the other hand, said she's not believed. And Rabbi Shua had said, even if it's roiv, ksherim, Rabbi Shua didn't matter at all. He said you have to be chayshish l'chumra. You have to assume that she was neval to a pasul, and she's pasul to kihuna. So neither of them say that you go bust a roiv. So what's Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri? Who's he going like when he says that you follow the roiv over here? So the Gemara is going to give two ways of understanding of Yochanan ben Nuri. The Gemara says that he holds like Rabbi Yeshua, and therefore ordinarily you would not allow this woman to marry kahuna. You would go l'chumra. However, here there was a reason to be makel. So the first approach is Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rav, and he says that here there were two roivs. There were two different possibilities as to where this man came from, where this ma'anes came from. Both of them were roiv ksherim. So therefore, it's like you have two roivs. It's a stronger reason to say that she should be kosher to kohanim. The Gemara way later, the Gemara is going to analyze this at length. The Gemara at far later will quote a much different approach of Rav Hanan by Rav in the name of Rav. So both of these are in the name of Rav, and that approach says that this was a hiras shah. There were other reasons here to be mekel, and this was a temporary psak based on the scenario. There were other factors that were involved, and this is not something you can learn from anywhere else. It really holds like Rabbi Shua that you should go l'chumra, but here there were other circumstances, other extenuating circumstances involved. So the Gemara first gets into this concept of two roivs. So the Gemara says what happened was that it was in the city of Tzipori, and it was marketplace, and there were lots of wagons coming into town, lots of people traveling into the town to attend the market. So there are people here from the city of Tzipori and many people from outside Tzipori. The majority of the people in Tzipori were ksherim, and the majority of the people coming into Tzipori for the market were also ksherim. So you had two roivs, you had two majorities. Two majorities is more lenient than one majority, and therefore you should go lenient and say that we'll assume that she is a kosher. So even though Rabbi Yeshua generally does not follow the Rav, here he would follow the Rav. So this explanation is brought by Rav Ami. It's also brought by Rav Yanai. Rav Yanai's phraseology was a little strange. The Gemara says that it says if she was nival on the wagons. The Gemara says she was nival on the wagons. The Gemara says no, she was nival at the time the wagons. That's what he means. And therefore you have two Ravs. That's where you say that she's kosher to Kahanim. Now, says the Gemara, there's another statement, and it's a bit more complex. That's Rav Dimi, the name of Zeiri, quoting Rav Chanina, or possibly just Zeiri himself, quoting Rav Chanina. And he said that if it's nival in the Kronos, it's okay. Nival in the city is not. the Gemara is going to have to analyze this in order to understand what that means. And the Gemara gets from this also what the explanation is. Why do we need two robes here? So the Gemara says the explanation is based on a concept called kol kavua kemechza amachzem, which means anything which is set in its place has the status of 50-50. And this is a concept the Gemara quotes from Rabbi Zera. And that what happened is as follows. Whenever you have a suffix and you have a majority, so the only time you say majority rule in any circumstance, the only time there is even considered to be a majority, is if the question was formed by something which left the mixture. You have a mixture and something came out of the mixture, and that you don't know if it came from the majority or the minority, there you follow majority. However, if the mixture stands in place and somebody goes to the mixture and takes from it, there you don't have a concept of majority. Even if it's 99% to 1, it's always considered to be automatically 50-50. The Gemara says this as a rule. The Gemara is going to give sources for it and prove it. The Gemara does not give an explanation. Anything which is in its place and it's not moving, that is where the mixture of things, the things that are combined, are in its place and not moving, that is a 50-50. Now, this woman who was raped here, so Pashtus, the simplest shot is that the man came towards her. That means that you have a mixture of all the men in the city. I don't know who the rapist was, but he came from that group and he came towards her. Then it should be Rove, and then you would be correct. That would be Rove, and you could go follow the majority and everything would be fine. The problem is that maybe she went to him. Whatever the circumstance was, maybe she went to him, and that's where the incident happened. If that's true, so then he, along with all the other men in the city, stood in place, and she came to them, and therefore they were not moving, they were kavua, and it's machzah. Machzah is 50-50. In that case, you would have to go l'chumrah, you don't have a rove. So because we don't know what happened, we have to say, listen, it's possible that it was kavua. If it would be kavua, she would have to be asur because there's no rove. So if we can't follow the rove, even in a case where we don't know what happened, it could be that the man came to her, but we have to assume now we have to asur it. That being the case, we also would have to asur if they were traveling along the road and there was wagons, there's a bunch of wagons that were on the way, it was a caravan in transit, and everybody's moving around, there is no kavua, but there you would also have to say the same thing. Even though there's no kavua, I have to make a gzeira. In the city I have to asur it because it may be a case of kavua and therefore it's 50-50. On the road I also have to asur it because it's kavua and that's 50-50. The only case I can matter is if you have wagons and you have the city both at the same time. You have the people in the city moving around, and you have people coming from the wagons which are also moving around. Both those rows together, there I don't have to make a gzeira to a situation in which potentially she went to the man and there is no rove there. That's the Gemara's explanation. Now the Gemara asks that you don't say this in other cases. Other cases you just say that if the thing came out of the mixture, then you could follow the rove. If you went to the mixture, you can't follow the rove. We don't say you need two roves, you make gzeras. What's the case of that? So in that case is if you find a piece of meat, you don't know which store it's from. So if in town you have 10 butcher shops, 9 of them sell kosher meat, 1 of them sells treif meat, and I have a piece of meat, I don't know which store it's from. So what should I do? So if the piece of meat came out of the store itself, that is if somebody brought it, it was found in the street, it came from one of the stores. I don't know, somebody brought it, he dropped it, a guy bought it, somebody bought it, I don't know. Whatever, it left the stores. The stores didn't stand in place and I went to the stores. If it left the stores, the halachas you follow the Rav. You say, kol the parish miruba, parish, this meat must have come from the majority. The 9 out of the 10 sell kosher meat. I assume that this is kosher meat from one of the kosher stores. If, however, I went into one of the stores, I bought a piece of meat. When I came home, I said, hold on, which store did I go to? And I don't know. And the stores were not moving. They were all in place. So it's kavua. There it's 50-50. So there, in the case of the kavua where I went to the store, I don't know which one I asked her. I say it's 50-50. Rabbi Zera is the one who brings this halacha. If, however, the piece of meat came out of the store, and that's where I met it, and that's where my suffix began, then I say that there's rove. I don't say I need 2 roves. What would be the case of 2 roves? 2 roves would be that you have to have the gates of the city are open, and people are bringing in meat from outside the town. And those stores that they're coming from are also majority kosher food. And that's not the case. Rabbi Zera said clearly that's not what's going on over here. You don't have to assume that that's what's happening. It's even if the gates of the city are locked and there's absolutely no way in which anybody else got in, and there's only 1 rove, you would still say the same halacha. So how come? Why is it different there? And Gemara's answer is Maila also b'yochsin. They made a special chumrah as far as the halachos of marriage, who's allowed to marry who, if this woman's allowed to marry kohanim or not. A special added chumrah was given that you need 2 robes, that we make these gzeras of kavua to a case of legitimate rove. The Gemara now wants to get deeper into this concept of kol kavua. Gemara wants to know what is the source for this. So we have to figure it out on 2 levels. First of all, where do we see it in a brisa? How do we see that it's true if it's a chumrah? How do you see it's true that if it's a kula? And where do you see da'iraisa on a Torah level that such a concept exists? Because it's not the kind of thing you could just make up. So first of all, where do we see that that the Tanoim hold of it? Where do you see it in a brisa? So the Gemara says, well, the first obvious source would be the case of the 9 stores selling kosher meat and the 1 store selling treif meat, which we just said, where if you go to the stores and you don't know which store you went to, so you have to say that it's 50-50. So says Gemara, that's good for a chumrah. That shows that even though the majority would be to be lenient and say that it came from the 9 stores, but you have to go to chumrah and assume maybe it came from the 1 store and call it 50-50. That's what the brisa, that is a brisa. That's what the brisa says, that halacha, and that shows you that you have to say kavua l'chumrah. But where do you see the kula? So the Gemara says, okay, maybe I'll try from the case of 10 small creatures that died and you touched one of them and you want to know are you tameh or not. So there are 8 types of rodents that are metameh. They're called the shmona shvatzim. Frogs are not one of them. Frogs are tahar. So if somebody touched one of these animals, 9 of them were frogs, and one of them was a real one of the shmona shvatzim. One of them was metameh. He doesn't know which one he touched. So the halacha is that because it's a suffix, he has to assume that he's tameh, even though 9 of them are frogs. But he went and touched them, so you have to make it 50-50, not 9-1. So Mar says, again, that's a chumrah. You're being machmir to use it as a concept of 50-50 and not rov. So that brisa is not going to help you show a source, the kula. So the Gemara says, okay, I'll give you a different source, the kula. And that's the case where you had 9 shvatzim, 9 dead rodents that are metame, and 1 frog, and you touched one of them. You don't know which one of them you touched. So over there, the halacha is that if it's in Rishus HaYachid, you're tameh. It's in Rishus HaRabim, you're assumed to be tahar. Now that's a general rule in all of Tumah V'Tara. Safek Tumah in Rishus HaYachid is tameh. That's learning Xeris HaKasser from Sota. And Safek Tumah in Rishus HaRabim is tahar. However, that's only true if it's a 50-50 Safek. If it's a rov, so then you follow rov, and you don't ever get to the concept of Safek Tumah Rishus HaYachid Rishus HaRabim. Now here it's 9-1. 9-1 and tameh over tahar. How come we say that if it's a suffix tumah, how can we still give it the halacha of suffix tumah to say that if it's in Rishus HaRabim, you're tahar? Obviously, then you say the concept of kol kavua, even l'kula. Now, that's a good source, and from a brisa. Where do you see it in the psukim? So the Gemara says there's a pasuk discussing somebody who kills someone else by accident and he needs to go to Ari Miklad. The pasuk says, he's hunting him and he comes up against him, he ko nefesh v'meis, and he hits him and he dies. So there, so he has to run away to one of the Ari Miklat. So the Gemara says there, it says he's going after the guy. So it has to be that you intended to hit the guy that you hit. It can't be that you hit someone else. If you hit someone else, you wouldn't have to. But obviously, you didn't intend to kill the guy, or you would be a murderer, not be going to Arei Miklat. But it has to be that you intended to hit this guy and not someone else. Now, there's a machlokes Tanaim in a different Masechta. It's in Baba Kama Daf Mem Dalid. What do we learn from these psukim over here? So you had one Tana, it's Rabbi Shimon, I believe, and that's in Sanhedrin where you find his opinion, that he says that from here you learn that if you aim for one person, hit someone else, you don't have to, that's not considered to be this type of murder that you would have to go for Galus. Now the Rabbanon disagree. The Rabbanon say you do have to go to Galus for that. So the Rabbanon, how do they learn this pasuk? What's the limit here? So they say the pasuk is talking about in a situation of rove. How does that work out? So you threw a stone into a crowd. You didn't know who you were going to hit, and you hit somebody. So the Gemara says, what's the case exactly where I have a limit from here that you're not chayiv? So if it's talking about where it was majority Kinanim and one Yisrael, so then you wouldn't be chayav anyway without a limud. It's roiv Kinanim. There's no halacha there of being sent to Galus. If it's 50-50, so you also wouldn't have to. Safik nefashos. You go lekula. It's a safik of dine nefashos. So you go leniently. So it's got to be referring to where it was majority Yisraelim. And we still say, since the people were all standing and you threw a rock into them, it's kavua, and therefore it's machzah. So that's your source for that. Okay, so this is all the Gemara's discussion on the first way of understanding the opinion of Rav Yochanan ben Nuri. Now the Gemara brings the second way of understanding him, which we mentioned earlier. So first of all, we have Rav Chia bar Ashi says the name of Rav, the halacha is like Rav Yosi quoting Rav Yochanan ben Nuri. Rav Chanan bar Rava says that it's a hiras shah. It was a temporary thing over there. It was not because it was two roivs. So the Gemara asks as follows. Rav Yirmiyah asks a question that this makes it sound like for Yuchsin, for figuring out if you're allowed to marry Kahana or not, you don't need two rows. That's what this approach is over here. So the problem is that we have a brisa that seems to say otherwise. The brisa says if you find a child and you don't know who he is, you don't know what kind of yichus is, so it depends on the majority of the people who live in the city. If it's Roiv Evdei Kechavim, it has a din of Evdei Kechavim. If it's Roiv Yisrael, it has a din of Yisrael. If it's 50-50, it has a din of Yisrael. So Gemara is going to explain the Inyan what halachas do we say each of these things. Now, Rav says you only say it as far as keeping him alive, being Machal Shabbos to keep him alive, which is something you'd only do for a Yisrael. As far as Yuchsin, you don't say. The Gemara explains, what do you mean you do not say? If it was a girl, you would not allow her to marry a Kohen, even if it's majority Yisrael. So there, you're clearly saying that you need two robes, in this case no good because it has only one robe. So how does that fit with what you're telling me that it was only a haras shah? So the Gemara says that the opinion of Rav Yehuda Merav is not a problem. The opinion of Rav Yehuda Merav said you need to have two rows. That's how he understood Rav's opinion. So the Gemara says that according to him, we would have no problem. The one who asked this kasha wouldn't have a kasha. He was either not aware of it or he was asking on the other one. And the other one does not hold you need two rows. The other one would just say that was haras shah, which means as follows. Everyone agrees, halacha l'maaseh today, you need to have two rows. The question is, there was two rows, or there was a special reason that you didn't need two rows because it was a special haras shah, but now you always do need. And therefore, it fits with Rav here who says you need two rows. Now the Gemara wants to get into this brisa and how you explain it more in detail. What are each of these halachas referring to? So the Gemara said, like we quoted Rav said that it's only as far as keeping him alive, that's what it's nageya. To say that he's considered to be a Yisrael, as far as Yuchsin, you would not. Shmuel commented on that, and Shmuel said, you're allowed to dig him out from under a pile. If a building fell on him, you're allowed to dig him out, which means you're allowed to be Machal Shabbos to save him, and you need to go follow Rav. So the Gemara asks, that doesn't seem to be correct. Shmuel said, you don't need Rav Yisrael in order to be Mechal Shabbos for the guy. Even if it's Rav Akum, you still Mechal Shabbos on the minority chance that he is a Yisrael. So the Gemara says, so therefore really Shmuel was commenting on the first thing, where we said that if it's Rav Evdei Kechavim, as it did of Rav Kechavim, Shmuel said, unless it's as far as Pikuach Nefesh, to dig him out from under a collapsed building, that you would even if it was Roiv Evdei Kechavim, you would still not consider him to be an Evdei Kechavim, and you would dig him out, and you'd be Mechal Shabbos for that. Now, the Gemara says, we had it divided up into three halachos, Roiv Evdei Kechavim, Roiv Yisrael, and 50-50. What is the Inyan? What are we saying each of these halachos? So, the Gemara said, we consider him to be an Akum, if it's Roiv Evdei Kechavim, as far as feeding him non-kosher food. If the city is Rav Akam, you're allowed to feed him non-kosher food. You don't have to be afraid that he is really a Yisrael. When we say that if it's Rav Yisrael, you consider him to be a Yisrael, what's that? So obviously you're not going to feed him non-kosher food, but what's the chiddush in the Mishnah to say this? The chiddush is that even if he loses an object and somebody else finds it, that person has to give it back. and you could take money away from the person who found it. He has to give it back, has to return it, because you consider this person to be a Yisrael. It's Roiv Yisrael. He can claim the money away from him. Now we said 50-50. We stated it. If it's 50-50, he still has halacha of Yisrael. The Indian, what halacha is that said? So Mara quotes Rish Lakish says that's as far as Nezikin. As far as if a cow gores another cow. The halacha is if a cow of a Yisrael gores a cow of a Yisrael. So if it was the first time it happens, he only has to pay 50% of the damages. If he gores a Akum, he doesn't have to pay anything. If the cow of Akum gores a cow of Yisrael, even the first time he has to pay full damages. So what are we referring to here when we say that it's 50-50 is considered to be a Yisrael? So says the Gemara, let's go through it. If you're referring to where our cow gored his, so how can we say that he's considered to be a Yisrael? We shouldn't have to pay him. We should say if you're an Akum, we don't need to pay you. It's 50-50. Prove you're not an Akum. I don't need to pay you. I'm the Muksik. I'm holding on to the money, so that's not true. So the Gemara says it must be referring to where his cow gored our cow. So on the tzad that he's an Akum, he has to pay full. On the tzad that he's Yisrael, he only has to pay half, because it's Chatzi Nezek, first Nezikin. So there, the halacha is that he has halacha of Yisrael, he only has to pay half, because he could say, prove to me that I'm in Akum, and then I'll pay you full. You can't prove it, therefore I was a mochasek, hold on to my money, and I don't need to pay you.